Most people welcome the new year with noise, lights, and people they trust. But some of the most disturbing moments don't happen at midnight parties. They happen in quiet houses, empty roads, and places where time feels like it hesitates. The stories you're about to hear are 100% true, verified through public records, local reports, and first-hand witness accounts. For privacy and safety, some names and locations have been changed, but every event you'll hear actually happened. If this story pulls you in, hit like. It helps this video reach more horror lovers just like you. Comment where you're watching from. You're part of my horror family, and I want to know where my family's watching from. And as you listen, comment which story hits you the hardest. Finally, subscribe. It's what fuels this channel to bring you even more unsettling true stories. Now, let's begin.
I was 29 that winter. Broke, recently divorced, and working the night desk at the Ridgeway Motor Court, a low concrete motel tucked off a 2-lane road in the Appalachian foothills of eastern Kentucky. The mountains pressed in close there, rising like dark shoulders on both sides of the highway. Fog settled early and stayed late. By December 31st, the ground was nothing but mud and dead leaves, and the air smelled like wet pine and old oil. New Year's Eve was usually dead. Travelers avoided the mountains after dark in winter, and locals didn't waste money on motel rooms when they lived 10 minutes away. I was alone behind the desk, a space heater humming at my feet, counting minutes until midnight on the wall clock that always ran 2 minutes slow. Rain had been falling since dusk, steady, heavy, the kind that soaked through your coat in seconds. The parking lot lights reflected off puddles, empty spaces stretching out like a grid of nothing. I remember thinking how quiet it was. No fireworks yet, no traffic, just rain and the distant sound of the creek behind the property, swollen and fast. At 11:48 p.m., headlights swept across the office window. A sedan rolled in slowly, tires hissing through water. It parked crooked across 2 spaces, engine still running. I watched the driver sit there, longer than normal. Hands on the wheel, head bowed. When he finally stepped out, I noticed how soaked he was. Not damp, soaked through, like he'd been standing in the rain for a long time. He came into the office without looking around. Mid-30s, maybe early 40s. Clean-shaven, no luggage. His jacket dripped onto the tile, leaving dark half-moon stains. "I need a room," he said. His voice was flat, tired. "Just until the year changes." I asked him how many nights. He didn't answer right away. Just stared at the counter, eyes unfocused. "Just until midnight passes," he said again. I remember hesitating, then shrugging. I rang him up for one night anyway. He paid in cash, didn't give me a name I recognized. Just a last name that sounded local, Appalachian old. When I handed him the key to room 6, he looked at it longer than necessary. "Is it still standing?" he asked. "What?" I said. "The building," he clarified. "Is it the same?" I laughed awkwardly, assuming he was joking or drunk. "Yeah, same as ever." That seemed to satisfy him. He nodded once and turned to leave. I watched him walk across the lot, rain flattening his hair, shoulders slumped like he was carrying something heavy. He didn't look back. After that, time dragged. The rain softened, fog thickened. At 11:58, distant fireworks echoed from somewhere down in the valley, muffled by the mountains. Colors flashed faintly through the mist. Midnight came and went. I waited for him to check out, or at least come back for a receipt. Nothing. Room 6 stayed dark. No TV glow. No movement behind the curtains. At 12:20, I grabbed my flashlight and walked out. The air felt colder, heavier. Fireworks were still popping far away, but up here it was quiet again. Too quiet. I knocked on the door of room 6. No answer. I unlocked it, expecting to apologize for waking him. The door swung open easily. The room looked untouched. Bed made tight, bathroom dry, no wet footprints on the carpet, no jacket, no smell of damp clothes. The heater was off. The air inside felt stale, unused. The only thing on was the TV. It showed a local news broadcast, frozen mid-frame. A chyron at the bottom read, "One dead in Ridgeway motor caught fire, New Year's Eve." The date in the corner said last year. I stood there listening to the hum of the television, feeling something cold settle behind my ribs, trying to understand why my motel was on the screen, burned, blackened, and why the room I was standing in smelled faintly of smoke. I shut the door behind me and turned the TV off. The sudden silence felt wrong, like the room had been holding its breath. I stood there longer than I should have, waiting for something to make sense. It didn't. Back in the office, I pulled up old security footage. The cameras were grainy and unreliable, but I found the clip from earlier that night. The man checking in looked exactly as I remembered, soaked, tired, eyes hollow. He walked toward room 6 and disappeared inside. There was no footage of him leaving. I told myself it was nothing. People slip out all the time. Maybe he left through the woods behind the motel. Maybe the TV had been left on by housekeeping, and the broadcast was some old recorded loop. Rational thoughts stacked neatly, but they didn't hold. Around 1:30 a.m., I smelled smoke again, faint, like burnt paper. I walked the length of the building, checking each room. Everything was fine. No alarms, no heat. But when I passed room 6, the smell was strongest. I unlocked the door again. This time the room felt warmer. The TV was back on, the same frozen image. I noticed details I hadn't before. The scorched edges of the doorframe on the screen, the fire marshal's badge, the motel sign warped and half melted, and the name of the victim listed beneath the headline. It was the same last name the man had given me. I turned the TV off harder than necessary, like it had offended me. My hands were shaking now. I locked the door and took the key back to the office, placing it in the drawer like that might contain whatever was happening. I didn't sleep after my shift. I drove home through the fog, headlights cutting tunnels through the dark. Every abandoned cabin and burned-out trailer along the road felt like it was watching me. The next day, I went to the county records office. I didn't tell myself why. I just went. The clerk barely looked up as she pulled an old article for me. There had been a fire at the Ridgeway Motor Court the previous New Year's Eve. Electrical. Room 6, 1 fatality. The motel had been closed for months afterward, renovated quietly, reopened without much attention. The man who died had checked in alone just before midnight. No one had been working the desk that night. The previous owner had already left early. I quit the motel a week later. Couldn't stand the smell anymore, or the quiet. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about the way he asked if the building was the same, about how he paid for a room that already belonged to him. Every New Year's Eve since then, I wake up before midnight. I listen for fireworks through the mountains, and I picture that room. Clean, untouched, waiting. Not haunted. Just remembered. I took the delivery job because I didn't want to be home on New Year's Eve. That was the honest reason. Home had gotten too quiet after my father passed. The kind of quiet that presses in on you until you start replaying things you wish you'd done differently. Driving felt easier. Motion helped. I was running packages for a regional courier service out of a small distribution hub near Harlan County, Kentucky. Most of my route cut through the Appalachian backroads. Old coal towns stitched together by narrow highways. Hollows fogged in so thick you couldn't see the tree line. On December 31st, almost everyone cancelled deliveries, but a few last-minute shipments still had to go out. Medication, legal documents, things people needed before the year turned. By 8 that night, the fog had settled low and heavy. My headlights carved weak tunnels through it, illuminating wet pavement and fallen leaves plastered to the road. Houses thinned out as I climbed higher, replaced by abandoned trailers with collapsed porches, rusted cars half swallowed by brush, and the occasional flicker of a porch light deep in a hollow. The radio barely worked. Static swallowed most stations. I drove with the window cracked, breathing in cold air that smelled like wet wood and diesel. Somewhere in the trees, something moved, probably a deer, but it kept pace with me longer than I liked. Around 11:40 p.m., I pulled over on the shoulder to check my phone. I had 3 stops left, all clustered in a quiet residential stretch just outside an old town called Mill Creek. The roads there twisted back on themselves, named after families that hadn't lived there in decades. I hated that area. Too many turns, too many identical intersections swallowed by trees. That's when the first voicemail came in. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, assuming it was a spam robocall, but something made me open it. The audio crackled for a second before a voice came through, breathing fast, words tripping over themselves. Don't stop. Don't stop the car. Please, just keep driving. It took a second for the realization to land. That was my voice. Same flat Appalachian accent. Same slight hitch when I got anxious. Even the background noise, the hum of the engine, the faint rattle in the dashboard, matched what I was hearing around me in real time. I pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at it like it had done something wrong. Then another voicemail came in, and another, each from a different unknown number. Every message was me, more panicked each time. Don't turn on to Laurel Ridge. Miss the turn. You have to miss it. If you slow down, it's over. I laughed once, sharp and humorless, trying to shake it off. Voice spoofing wasn't unheard of. Some sick prank, maybe, or a glitch. The mountains messed with signals. Everyone knew that. But when I checked my GPS, the next turn was Laurel Ridge Road. The fog thickened as midnight crept closer. Houses appeared again, spaced far apart, most dark. No fireworks yet, just silence and the low rumble of my tires. I told myself I was tired, that my brain was filling in gaps. Another voicemail arrived just before 11:59. I can see the pole. Don't brake. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I slowed anyway, heart hammering, scanning the roadside. Trees pressed in close. The road dipped slightly, curving left. At midnight, distant fireworks cracked faintly somewhere down in the valley. As the year changed, my phone buzzed one last time. I didn't listen to that one. Instead, I drove straight past Laurel Ridge Road, ignoring the GPS recalculating angrily. My chest tight with a fear I couldn't explain. In my rearview mirror, the fog swallowed the intersection whole, like it had never existed. I finished my route without incident, though my nerves never settled. Every unfamiliar sound made me flinch. When I finally clocked out and headed home, the roads felt wrong, too familiar and not familiar enough, like I was driving through a memory instead of a place. I didn't sleep much that night. The voicemail sat unopened on my phone, a weight I kept shifting around instead of dealing with. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was stress, grief, my mind trying to warn me in the only language it had. 2 days later, I took a different route through Mill Creek to make another delivery. Daylight stripped the place bare. The fog was gone, revealing steep slopes, muddy ditches, and mailboxes leaning at odd angles. It all looked smaller, less threatening. That's when I saw it. A utility pole on Laurel Ridge Road was wrapped in yellow tape. Skid marks scarred the pavement, dark and unmistakable. A sedan sat off the shoulder, crumpled around the pole like it had tried to hug it too hard. The windshield was shattered. The driver's side door had been cut away. The car was my make, my model. Same dent along the rear bumper I'd never bothered fixing. I pulled over without thinking, my mouth dry. The air smelled faintly of oil and cold metal. Someone had left flowers at the base of the pole, already wilting. A local sheriff stood nearby, talking quietly with a man in a Mill Creek Fire Department jacket. I didn't approach. I didn't need to. Later, I looked it up. Single vehicle accident. Driver pronounced dead at the scene just after midnight on New Year's Eve. Name withheld pending notification. The last voicemail was still on my phone. I listened to it that night, sitting alone in my truck, engine off. The voice was calmer, tired. I didn't miss it this time, it said. I thought maybe you could. I don't drive deliveries anymore. I avoid Laurel Ridge Road entirely. Sometimes, late at night, when my phone buzzes unexpectedly, my stomach still drops. I've never received another message like those. But every New Year's Eve, right before midnight, I find myself gripping the wheel a little tighter, listening to my own breathing, wondering how close I came to not being here. And whether some part of me still took that turn anyway. In my family, New Year's Eve was never about parties or fireworks. We stayed awake together because my mother believed if you crossed into the new year alone, you carried that loneliness with you. Even after I moved out of Harlan County, that habit stuck. Phones on speaker, TV murmuring in the background, someone always counting down too early. That year, I broke the tradition. A friend from college, Evan, asked me to house sit his place while he and his wife visited her parents in North Carolina. His house sat high in the Appalachian foothills, outside a town called Brushy Fork. One of those places that barely shows up on maps. I told myself it was just one night. I'd call my family before midnight and make it feel the same. The road up to the house was a narrow ribbon of cracked asphalt, mud spilling over the edges where rain had chewed through the shoulder. Fog hung low between the trees, thick enough that my headlights just flattened it into a white wall. When I finally reached the gravel drive, my tires crunched loud in the silence, echoing off the hills. The house was older than it looked in pictures. Wood siding swollen from moisture. A porch that sagged slightly in the middle. When I stepped inside, the air smelled like dust, cold iron, and something faintly sweet. Rotting leaves tracked in and never fully cleaned out. Evan had warned me the place made noises. Settling, wind in the eaves. Still, every creak felt deliberate. The layout was strange too. Narrow hallways that turned sharply, doors opening into each other in ways that didn't make sense. The living room clock hung crooked. It ticked louder than it should have been. There were two others, one in the kitchen, one in the hallway, none showing the same time. I tried to make it feel normal. Turned on lamps, put the TV on low, called my mother around 11. She teased me for being away, told me not to fall asleep before midnight. When we hung up, the house felt bigger. Outside, the neighborhood was dark. No fireworks, no distant laughter. Just fog swallowing the road and woods pressing close. Even the usual night sounds, crickets, dogs, the low rush of wind, were muted, like the hills were holding something back. At 11:55, I poured myself a drink and sat on the couch. The TV countdown played quietly, the hosts smiling too wide. I watched the second hand on the living room clock creep forward. At 11:59, it stopped. Not slowed, not stuttered, stopped. I noticed because the ticking cut out mid-beat. Then I realized the kitchen clock had gone silent too. I checked my phone. No service. The digital time froze, screen dimming without changing. That was when the neighborhood went quiet. Not gradually, instantly. A pressure settled over the house, heavy and close. I became aware of my own breathing, the sound of fabric shifting when I moved. Somewhere deep in the woods, something snapped. A branch, maybe, but it didn't echo. Then came the knock. Slow, heavy, intentional. I stood, heart thudding, telling myself it was someone lost or a neighbor checking in. The second knock came, followed by a voice. 10. Low, calm, close to the door. Each number followed with another knock. 9, 8. The voice didn't rush. It sounded practiced, like it had done this before. I stood frozen until the counting stopped. After midnight, I forced myself to move. The peephole showed an empty porch. No one standing there, just damp wood and fog. When I opened the door, cold air rushed in, and I saw the footprints. Fresh, deep, leading away from the house, facing backward. I didn't follow the footprints. That's the part I think about most. How instinct overrode curiosity. The prints pressed into the wet porch boards, and then into the mud beyond. Heels pointed toward the house, toes aimed out toward the road, like someone had walked away without ever turning around. I shut the door and locked it, every click of the deadbolt sounding too loud. My hands shook so badly I had to sit on the floor. The house felt different now. Smaller, tighter, like it had shifted when I wasn't looking. The clocks were still stopped. I didn't sleep. I sat with my back against the couch, lights on, watching the windows fog, and clear with my breathing. Every sound, wood popping, something brushing the siding, made my chest tighten. I checked the door twice more before dawn. The footprints were still there, slowly filling with water as rain started again. In the morning, everything felt wrong in a quieter way. The clock started ticking again, all at different times. My phone regained service, showing dozens of missed notifications that hadn't come through before. Messages from my family, all sent just after midnight, asking why I'd hung up. I walked the property in daylight. The prints ended near the edge of the road, where mud gave way to gravel. No tire tracks, no other footprints. Just the woods beyond, dark even under gray morning light. When Evan called that afternoon, I almost told him. Instead, I asked about the neighbors. There was a pause. He said the house across the road had been empty for years. An older man lived there once, quiet, kept to himself. He died alone just after New Year's a long time ago. Heart attack, they thought. No one found him until days later. They used to say he knocked on doors, Evan added, like it was nothing. Just before midnight. Some kind of tradition, I guess. Checking who was still awake. I didn't respond. My throat felt tight. I drove home that evening, mud splashing up the sides of my car, fog curling low in the hollows. The road felt longer than before. Every house I passed looked closed, sealed tight against something outside. That night, I sat with my family on the phone until midnight, just like always. We counted together, laughed too loud. When the year changed, I felt relief, but it didn't last. Sometimes, late at night, I wake convinced I hear knocking. Slow, measured. I count my breaths instead, waiting for it to stop. I never house sat again, and I never stay alone on New Year's Eve, because whatever walked away from that door didn't need to come inside to make sure I remembered it.